listening, she's going to pop on again. Kristin was sharing that, as you're making these huge ahas and having these insights, how do you go about and keep them consistent?
And really make them lasting change so that they stick. And so she'll join in a minute, but I wanted to address that that when you're doing these changes, right, when you're growing and you're evolving, that there are, there's a functional way that the mind is set up on how you create change in your life. And the first and most important thing is your identity. And I know for me, I had kind of a tough lesson when I broke up with my ex-boyfriend back in my 20s. And I was unhappy with a lot of things in my life. And I thought that if I, sold all my possessions and left and traveled around the world, that it would solve all my problems. And what I didn't realize in this process is that wherever you go, there you are. So I went all the way around the world. And yes, I evolved. And yes, I, had shifts and up levels and all that stuff. However, I was basically changing my environment. And your environment is the last thing that changes. Your environment is a reflection of the changes that you make further up the ladder. And yay, Kristin, I'm going to ask you again. The reflection of changes that you make further up the ladder. And I learned that. I was just sharing.
Sorry.
No worries. The same thing happened yesterday. So anyway, what I was saying is that, with all these shifts that are happening, right? Like, how do you make them last, right? So there's a few, one, it just, change is an evolution. And, all of these things are a practice. And, within sort of the mind framework, the first thing is our identity, right? And that's where really all the change happens. And then, this was my point, then we have values, right? And you're saying that when you get stressed out, things tend to kind of go backwards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So one thing I think a really important distinction is we have two sets of values. We have our day-to-day values and everything is going good and, everything is amazing and things are going according to plan. We have a certain set of rules and a certain set of values and everything works. But when we get pushed to a threshold, whether that's through stress or tragedy or grief or whatever it could be, when you basically get pushed all the way to your edge, then your values shift and you go into these threshold values. So that may be something to take notice of, that, your values in daily life, are kind of dialed in and they're shifting. However, when you get pushed to that edge, you may revert back. And that may be what you're noticing is I'm kind of reverting back to old behaviors because we kind of go into this fight or flight space. Yeah. And that may be what's going on. So kind of knowing that is sort of a reaction to this space, if you kind of back it up and you're like, okay, well, when I get really stressed out, I trigger these behaviors. So then ask different questions of what can I do to alleviate the stressful place that I'm going to, because it's kind of like when you hit the stressful place, you go down that road, right? It just triggers it. So instead of saying once I'm stressed out, how do I fix this stuff? Because, it may be so ingrained and, doing deeper work, you can split those values. And, that's something that you'll learn about as you get into NLP. You can do a process called a breakthrough session that will actually restructure your value system. And I know that sounds super crazy, but I saw it firsthand for myself and I did it with someone else and now I do it with my clients. And when you remove all of these subconscious beliefs that you may not even be consciously aware of, and the emotional triggers and thanks that are going on, then you just kind of clear out the clutter basically, and you're able to see things differently and your values naturally shift. So how does that distinction play out with what you're going through right now?
That totally makes sense. Absolutely. And I think two key things that really spoke to me that you said was, first, I think I need to sort of identify some of these triggers and and develop some new strategies and a new value system for when I am triggered.
Right.
I think that would be super helpful. And I think a lot of it is just, if I'm triggered or I get discouraged, like I just kind of go down the spiral of, monkey mind and, self-sabotage.
Yeah,
right.
All the things.
Yes. All the things. But that makes so much sense. And I think, and sort of, I think and I'll definitely look into the breakthrough session.
Yeah.
But I think being proactive and learning like what triggers me and when I tend to go down those kind of roads, and to not only journal when I feel good, journal when I feel like shit.
Right.
So
think about it like from your kid's perspective, right? Like the other day, like I've started, my daughter's old enough now that I can recognize patterns. Like she will have meltdowns at certain times of day if I'm not proactive about feeding her in advance, right? So, and then like everything will be fine, and then like the shit hits the fan, and I'm like, oh my God, I missed the eating window. Like now I have the devil child in my hands. I need to fix this, and then I have to like be like, maybe we should pause and have a snack. And she's like, I'm not hungry. I was like, I know you're hungry. Like you're angry right now. Right. So if you think about it, that's kind of like an easy, relatable metaphor is that, if you think about that part of you that gets triggered as kind of like your inner hungry child, and, your adult self is like able to step back and be like, oh, when we are in this certain environment, or when somebody says something to me a certain way, or when I'm with this certain person, I get triggered and then I go into this space. So, kind of being your own adult to foresee that stuff. And I mean, you can never foresee this stuff 100% of the time. I'll just flat out be straight up about that. However, when you are more intentional about it, you can start to lessen that. And as you stay in a higher vibe place, because you're not going into that kind of fight or flight stress zone, you're going to be raising your vibration, and like just naturally those circumstances and people will start to dissipate because of the fact that you're up leveling your energy internally. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. And I'm working with another coach, and we're really working on, and this is crazy. Like this is very new to me, but really listen, like getting into your body, and it really is just grounding, but in any situation, feeling in your body what you're feeling, like when I feel, that I start to get triggered or I start to get upset, what does that feel like in my body?
Right.
And it really kind of brings it from here down, and it sort of almost removes you from the situation. You can be a curious observer versus just, in this state of chaos that, like you said, it inevitably, if it gets to a certain point, just based on 30 something odd years of conditioning, it's gonna keep going down those railroad tracks. Yeah, that was super helpful. That makes a lot of sense.
Well, and I think also the one thing to consider to think about is that everything that happens in our life is an emotional response, and it lodges somewhere in our body. And I'm not, trained in those healing modalities to know exactly where that happens. It's something, that someone else could speak on more effectively. However, like when you're having these moments, you could say, what am I feeling right now? Right. And it's like, sometimes we don't even realize, like we just have these reactions and like go into panic mode or frustration or snap, and like learn how to kind of self-coach and just be like, I'm stressed out right now. Like what is really going on for me? And you could, your subconscious will respond. You could be like, oh my God, I'm really scared that if my business doesn't work, I'm going to lose my house. I don't know. I'm just making that up. Right.
Yeah.
But like, these are real fears that we have, that when, you're conscious of them, then you can take back the power and be more intentional and steer your landscape of your life than constantly being in reaction mode and just like you're constantly being triggered all the time, and you're not being effective in how you're managing your state, really.
Right. And yeah, the body stuff is really not even energy work. It's more like, when I get stressed, where do I feel it? Like, does my chest get tight? Do I have a headache? Like, am I does my stomach feel like it's going to be upset? Like, it's very like just basic stuff like that.
Right.
Not even like energy work, but it really does kind of bring you out of that little thought, you know, spiral and kind of into your body. And I feel like that really can shift if you can do it, you know, in the moment.
Right. Well, and I think there's also an element of grace that you need to have with yourself, which, you know, I mean, process for me is to have grace, because especially when you're a high achiever and a perfectionist, you're like, I must get it right.
Right.
So, you know, having that love for yourself is like, I'm human, I mess up, this is just real, and I'm gonna have moments. And then the other thing that I thought about with what you shared with me is you said you were having a challenging time visualizing, and I don't know if this is true for you. However, you know, we interpret the world around us through our senses, right? And some people kind of their driver is kinesthetic, where they feel things. Some people, they're very visual. Some people are auditory, they hear things. Some people are very digital and they perceive things through the, you know, sort of the self-talk that they have. Some people are gustatory through their taste buds. Maybe those are chefs, like for me, you know, or olfactory. I can't smell anything. So like, whatever. It's not like so one thing that came to mind is I'm wondering if your modality in your sort of your lead modality and how you interpret things is something other than visual.
I've always considered myself a super visual person,
right.
But I mean, I could really explore some of the other things. And I think when I'm in a good space, I can visualize, but it's when I get into, such a not so good space is when I have the trouble with visualization. But yeah, I can definitely. How do you explore those modalities as far as?
I mean, I think like auditory and kinesthetic and visual are kind of the three main ones. And again, this is just sort of an intuition, but if your values shift when you get pushed to your edge, you know, maybe the modalities in which you interpret the world get pushed to your edge. So, you know, when you get to that place, you know, maybe like how you're dropping into your body, maybe when you get pushed to the edge, you're going to tune into what's going on more from a feeling perspective. Like, where do I feel it in my body? Yeah. What is the shape? What is the pressure? Is it hot? Is it cool? Where is it is it in my body? Is it outside my body? And kind of tune into that, because perhaps, you know, maybe when like, you know, you're in that normal status quo, visual is very easy for you to access. But when you're pushed to that edge and your values are shifting and you're kind of like off your center, maybe tuning into the feeling space is going to kind of calm you down and kind of bring you back. You really just need something to just play around with and see, you know, maybe visualization in that stressful place is not going to be an effective tool for you. And, you know, spending time tuning into yourself is going to get you more centered so you can kind of move back to where is more comfortable.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Because I'm definitely a visual learner, but I think that's something totally different.
Yeah.
I think, that makes sense. That really makes sense.
Cool. Well, what has been your biggest distinction through our conversation?
I think being proactive. I think more than anything is just being proactive and learning myself, and, you know, just like the hangry child, you know, there is a pattern. I mean, obviously there's a pattern. So I just have to identify that pattern and be willing to explore and journal and stuff when I don't, you know, when what goes down on the paper might not be, you know, exactly ideal or perfect. So. Right.
And I mean, I don't know about you, but like when I get stressed out, sometimes I'm like, fuck journaling. Like I just talk to myself like a crazy person. And I'm like, you know, like you might see me on the freeway or whatever, and I'm like yelling in the car or whatever. I'm just like muttering like, no.
Right.
I'm like, it's cool, people. I'm not crazy. I'm just doing
Well, when I have done that in the past, I remember one incident when I did journal when I was just in a very low vibe space. Right. I went back to it a few days later and I was like,
yeah.
And I just wrote in permanent marker, this is bullshit. Like in big letters, I was like, this is a pity party. Let's move on.
Yeah. So what are 3 action steps you can take to cement this distinction in?
I think right now I'm going to do some journaling right now about sort of what the sort of insights I had from this.
Right.
And I think I'm really going to take note of when I start to feel stressed or triggered or whatever, even if I keep a piece of paper in my pocket.
Right.
So it's super accessible. And then afterwards, you know, kind of explore what I can do. And this happens a lot at work. So, you know, it's got to be something, it's got to be an action step that I can sort of go to the bathroom.
Right. I mean, magic happens in the bathroom.
I spend a lot of time in the bathroom at work. Sorry, if y'all work with me and you're watching, that's why. That's why I'm in the bathroom a lot. But
one time I was in the bathroom for like 10 minutes and my boss was like, "Where were you?" I was like, "I was in the bathroom." Like,
right. Yeah.
I
had that question once and I asked the guy, I was like, I want you to really think about that question and ask yourself if you really want to know the answer.
Exactly.
And he was like,
"You're like, I had bad sushi at lunch. Do you want to know?"
Right. He's like, never mind.
Exactly. Well, and I think, you know, this maybe is an action step that you can do, you know, in the coming weeks, because I know you're having your NLP training coming up soon, is I think doing the journaling and the discovering of like, what are the triggers? Like what are the things that kind of push you to your edge? You know, what becomes true for you when you get to that place, right? Like what is true for you in your normal state and what is true for you when you push to that edge, and kind of see the distinction of like, you know, you may be able to delineate what your values differences are, but I think just understanding that's what you're looking for. And then when you go to your NLP class, they're going to teach you some values exercises, and you're also going to learn about anchoring. So you may be able to, you know, they're going to walk you through chaining anchors and different anchoring processes. So knowing this stuff is something that you deal with, you may be able to kind of create your own anchor while you're in that program that you can tap into when the stuff comes up.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's really powerful. Like what's true for me now versus what's true for me. I never really thought, I never really thought that way. Like I can literally have a different truth when I'm in that different state.
Oh yeah. When you're pushed to the edge.
Crazy. Yeah. Oh,
everything changes. You're like, I noticed that like on my own, like I would notice like in myself and other people, I'm like, why is it that I have these like staunch morals and values and then shit goes down and it's like, it's all thrown to hell and I'm all other things. And then I realized like that's actually a biological shift that happens is when you're pushed out of your comfort zone, your values shift. And I was like, oh, okay. And just knowing that I can recognize that in myself when I go to that edge, you know, what was true for me before is no longer true for me.
Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah.
That's definitely something this is one of them. Yeah. This is one.
Exactly. I saw the shift.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I know we went a little over, which is totally fine because I nerd out on stuff and I could, if Instagram let us, I'd be on. Just like
thank you. This was incredible. I really appreciate you doing this because I know when she saw me, you were like, oh my goodness.
Oh, like what's going
on? So thank you so much.
Yay. Well, have a wonderful day. And then, you know, let me know how your journaling goes and, you know, give me, update me in a week or so with, you know, what you've noticed and what sort of shifts you've made.
I will.
Excellent. All right. I'll talk to you later.
Bye.